Hi everyone, I am the online community manager for the Gypsy Nurse, and today we're going to learn the 3 simple steps you need to go from being enslaved to your job to designing your life on purpose so you can feel lighter, more in control, and more confident in a matter of weeks and get your nights and weekends back. Joining us today to share their expertise on this subject is Dr. Sharon Grossman, a success coach, speaker, and author of the bestseller Amazon book, The 7E Solution to Burnout, who helps high achievers crack the code of their burnout so they can find a tailored solution for recovery. So, without further ado, please let me introduce Dr. Sharon Grossman and our CEO of the Gypsy Nurse, Steve Curtin. Hi, guys. Thank you so much.
Hello. Hi, Dr.
Hey,
Grossman. Great to have you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
thank you so much for having me. I'm totally excited to be talking to you guys in particular because of your tribe of nurses. I've worked a lot with women in healthcare in particular, but I always welcome the men as well, and I certainly feel like there's a
Good.
need.
So I can stay?
It's interesting. Like recently, I've had many more men reach out to me, so I think there's a growing trend there.
Absolutely. Well, just so again, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and I know our community is excited to have you on. And burnout is obviously a huge topic within the travel nursing community, which is what we specialize in. But you talk about travel nursing; it's about 90%. There's no firm stats, so it's about 90% women and 10% men. So the male population is represented within travel nursing, that's for sure. But burnout affects everybody, right? Male, female, it's all the same, right?
100%. Yeah, it definitely doesn't discriminate.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. I'm going to drop off here and let you guys do it.
Thanks, Rachel.
All right. So to get us started, I'm going to just share my screen and then we will be able to get started. Is there anything else that you want to share, Steve?
No, I know that you have a presentation prepared, which is great. So I will stay on with you as you present. And then from there, obviously, we will take a break and we invite people that are viewing us to ask questions through chat. I have a bunch of questions myself as well. So we won't be for a lack of information sharing today, that's for sure. But this is fantastic. And again, we really appreciate your sharing this information with our audience because it's such a big topic these days.
For sure. So I'm just getting this up.
Okay.
Let's try this again.
Okay. If you have some trouble, then Rachel can certainly join us again and walk you through the share.
So it says loading, and I'm
Okay.
sure that in the next moment or so
Okay.
it'll catch back up. But in the
That,
meantime,
there we
um,
go.
yeah, you guys can see that. Fantastic.
We
All
definitely
right.
can see it.
Okay, then we're going to get started.
Okay.
All right, so if you are here, we are going to talk about how to get from exhausted to extraordinary in 90 days without having to quit your job, step back from your career, or take a sabbatical, which is, I know, something that a lot of people who are burned out try to do in, kind of a frenzy when you're feeling this stressed out, this burned out. You sometimes look for something possible that will help change your situation around. And I know that speaking with a lot of people in the healthcare industry, a lot of you actually love what you do. And so that's kind of where I come in, because I feel like, a lot of you have spent a lot of time and energy getting to where you are in your career. And if there's something getting in the way, but you still love the work and you want to be able to continue to do it, I want to be able to help you with that. So let's talk about who this is for. So if you are this person in healthcare and you're wondering, is this all there is? You've given your job your all and you feel like there's nothing left to give. This is going to really be helpful for that. And what we're going to be focusing specifically today on are some of the things that you can do. But before we jump into that, I really want to also highlight that there are real circumstances that are challenging in the workplace, right? And specifically for travel nurses, what we know is that this is the kind of position where you've got to hit the ground running. There is a real nursing shortage. You have to deal with staffing agencies and the healthcare system itself, and you have to deal with patients and their families. So these are all real circumstances. And as you can see here on the screen, there's additional things that happen. Like you might have a lack of support, or you might feel that compassion fatigue, or there's just too much to do and not enough recognition. So all of these things are real, and some of them are just out of your control. So what we really want to focus on is how to focus on the things that you actually can do something about. Now, what I like to say is that, travel nurses and people in healthcare in general aren't really that different from professional athletes. And what brings them together is the passion. You love doing the work that you do. You show up day in and day out to do it simply because you believe in the mission, right? You are absolutely passionate about it. And there's a really good side to that. So for instance, with professional athletes, what they do is they pour so much time and energy into perfecting their craft. And there's a really good side to that, in that we see people who are amazing in what they do, and they serve as inspiration for the rest of us. And the same can be said for nurses. You might be working to do your job really, really well, and to perform with great care and make sure that people are getting the kind of results that you want them to have, right? This is what brought you into the profession. You really care about other people. But the downside to putting so much into it is that, there could be actual downside. So with athletes, what we see is if you are training so hard, but not taking enough time to stretch your body, for instance, that's kind of a form of self-care, then what we can see is that you are strong, but maybe you are more prone to injury that way. And the same can be said for nurses. The downside of pouring so much into work and not having enough of a balance between work and your life outside of work is that you get that compassion fatigue. You get to a point where you're overwhelmed and stressed out and just absolutely exhausted. So all of this passion is really great, but it can also backfire. And so we want to be able to find a way to make this more sustainable. So here are some stats that I found. This isn't particularly specific for nurses, but what we know is that in general, about 77% of workers are burned out at their job. We also know that in healthcare, the statistic is pretty high. I would say around 50%. So 1 in 2 people in healthcare are typically burned out at any one time. This higher statistic of 77 is probably more reflective of over the course of time. So you may not be burned out at this moment, but maybe you've been in the past, or maybe you will be in the future. So it's a larger statistic. Now, the company that you work for may offer some initiatives, but about 21% say that their company doesn't offer anything related to burnout prevention or recovery. But even if your company did offer something, it's really up to you to take advantage of those perks. And what we see is that about 25% of workers don't use all of their vacation time. So, burnout is something that certainly can come as a result of all of these challenging circumstances at work. But as we'll see, a lot of it actually can also come from things that you bring to the table. Those are the things that you have more control over, and that's where we're going to focus on those. So the question is, how do you transition to that work-life balance without losing the passion or the productivity? And I like to say this is kind of like when you're a smoker and you want to quit smoking, right? The first step to making that change is to make a decision. You just have to decide, like, this is what I'm going to do. This is always the first step in anything that we do, right? When you decided to become a nurse, the first step was making the decision. This is what I want to study. This is the kind of work that I want to do. So you make the choice. Then from there, we want to follow some sort of a blueprint to make sure that we are taking the right steps to getting us to where we want to go. And what we know is a lot of times people want to quit smoking, for example, but they try different things and it doesn't work out. Or how many times have you been on a diet and you've decided, like, I'm going to lose weight, but maybe you didn't follow a good blueprint for that. And so you ended up either losing the weight and then gaining it back, or you tried different things and they didn't work. And so you ended up giving up on the thing altogether, right? So we want to be able to make sure that we're spending our time and energy on the right things. And then once we have that blueprint, obviously we want to be able to take massive action. Now, my grandmother was somebody who used to smoke 3 packs a day when she was young. And she just made that choice cold turkey. And once she did, she quit forever. So I think it is possible to make massive changes. And the changes actually don't have to be that dramatic. But what we do want to make sure of is that we are taking some sort of action and that we have some sort of guideline around what the right action for us would be. Now, this particular training today that we're talking about is really going to benefit you if you're somebody who struggles with mental fog, right? If you are dragging with your energy levels and you want to boost them up, or you just want to enjoy more of what matters in life. Now, you're somebody who got into travel nursing, I'm going to guess, because you really love traveling. And so that's kind of an added perk, maybe. Yeah. So, you're somebody who's already trying to figure out how to create more of that balance where you get to work and enjoy the travel, perhaps. This is also going to benefit you if you are somebody who currently feels really resentful at everyone and everything. As a matter of fact, just today, I released a podcast episode where I interviewed somebody about resentment. And one of the things she was saying is that she became really resentful because she was such a pleaser. She tried to take care of everybody and tried to fix everybody's problems, even before they knew they had a problem, right? And then she started to feel like resentful against them when they would come and ask her for something. And she'd be like, didn't I already do enough for you? And she didn't necessarily say that out loud, but she was thinking that. So if you find yourself being stuck with that resentment, this is definitely going to help you as well. If you're somebody who lives in dread and fear and you want to feel more calm, confident, and in control, we're definitely going to talk about that, as I mentioned. And it's going to be helpful to reframe certain things so that you don't get spun out with rumination. We also want to get you to a place where you have more of a sense of peace, and that comes from being more resilient against the stress, and also ultimately to be able to enjoy your work more and feeling that sense of empowerment and be able to spend time with family and friends and just ultimately have a better quality of life. So I'm just going to spend a moment just telling you a little bit about me so you know exactly who it is that's speaking to you today, with your permission. So I started out as a psychologist. This was back in 2003. I got my doctorate in psychology in 2008 from Fordham University in New York. And then I started working with high functioning adults who specifically had a lot of anxiety, depression, and trauma. This was in my therapy practice. And I was trained with a number of evidence-based practices, which, if you're a nurse, you probably appreciate that. In 2018, then I started to transition over a little bit into more life coaching. So I did that a little bit on the side while I was doing my therapy practice. And I started to research burnout in particular. And I was doing that because I decided I was going to write a book on the subject. I didn't really know much on burnout at the time, but as I started to research it, what I noticed was that so many of my clients were actually burned out, but they didn't even know it. So they would come in and they would start to describe how they're feeling. And I would say, it sounds like you're burned out. And then all of a sudden these light bulbs would go off and they'd be like, oh, that makes sense, right? So one thing I recognize is that people don't always know that what they're experiencing is related to burnout. So we use words like stress and overwhelm and exhausted or drained, but we don't always realize what these things mean in the context of burnout. And I think that's actually really important. And so I actually started focusing more and more on burnout in my coaching. And then in 2020, I finally published my book, The 7E Solution to Burnout. And now I am a full-time burnout coach, a speaker, and a trainer. I'm no longer doing the therapy piece. Okay. So to recap, I've spent about 20 years in the role of a therapist, and then some of the things that we can see in terms of results, because I think that's actually really important to speak about, is how the work that I do has helped people who are burned out, just like you, reduce their negative self-talk by up to 75%. The pressure to prove their self-worth, which I'm sure a lot of you are going to be able to really resonate with that, by 70%, which is huge. The overall stress and overwhelm went down by 40%, and their energy was able to go up by 80%, all in the framework of 90 days. So if you are currently struggling, what this is really saying is that it doesn't have to take long for you to get to the other side of this. And I hope that gives you a sense of hope about what's possible. The outcome when you have these kinds of results is that you can find more inner peace and live with more balance so that you can continue to work in a more sustainable way. So what we're going to talk about today is the 3-step formula to go from exhausted to extraordinary in 90 days. Here is the overview of that, and then we're going to get into the specifics. So step 1, you want to get in control of your mind, and I'm going to explain exactly why that's so important and how you can do that. Then step 2, once you have that down, is you want to optimize the way that you work. And again, I was saying in the beginning that there are all of these real parameters that can make work stressful and that can bring burnout on. But the way that you approach work is really important because we bring ourselves into the process. And probably what you've seen is that you can be amongst a whole bunch of other nurses who are doing the exact same work in the exact same place that you are. And some of them are burned out and others aren't. And so we want to look at how these factors that you bring to the table are actually contributing and what you can do to maximize your success there. And finally, changing your relationship to yourself. And we'll see specifically what that is really all about. So step 1, getting in control of your mind. This is really about turning the negativity that you have around. So what are the exact steps to go from exhausted to extraordinary in 90 days? So as we said, step 1 is to get in control of your mind. Now, what most people think is that they're stressed out because of all of these external factors that we mentioned. It could be their boss, their industry, their job. And in fact, I had a client who, when she got on a call with me, was specifically in that place. And she was very resentful about having to do any sort of work on herself. She said, why should I have to work on my mind when the problem is with my industry? Right? She was absolutely convinced that that's what was going on. She was in healthcare. And so we did a little exercise, and she was able to see that just by thinking slightly differently about her situation, she felt lighter, she felt more hopeful. And I said, imagine if every day you went to work with that feeling, right? You're still in the same industry, you're still in the same job, but all of a sudden your experience is different. And so she realized how much she's bringing of herself into the job that's affecting her outcomes, okay? Now, most people also think that the only option to feel better are, as I said in the beginning, to take a step back, to change their jobs, or to switch careers. And again, I want to say, certainly there are times when that's appropriate, but the people that I tend to work with are the people who want to stay in it. They just haven't figured out how to do it sustainably, and that's what I want to help you do. And the reality is you do have a lot more control over how you feel than you realize. So the reason that you're feeling so exhausted, overwhelmed, and resentful is because you think negative thoughts, right? That's what we're talking about, getting in control of your mind. So when you have these negative thoughts, this is what happens. You create more negative emotions because your thoughts and your feelings are very much connected. you are more likely to then use maladaptive coping strategies. And you can kind of get to see how your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors are all interlinked, and they affect your circumstances, or they affect your results rather, right? Stress then accumulates, it becomes chronic. Chronic stress is burnout. And then your performance and your confidence both go down. You don't always recognize that it's your thinking that creates your problems, right? So sometimes we'll see people who are trying these different solutions. This is coming back to the concept of why it's important to have this blueprint, because otherwise you end up focusing on the wrong thing and you stay stuck in that loop. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So what you really need to do is be able to differentiate between facts, which are your circumstances, and fiction, which is your perception, the stories that your mind makes up about your circumstances. And sometimes we don't really know the difference between those two. I know it sounds very basic, but I have to tell you, so many of my clients really struggle with this, right? Because they have all these thoughts, they have all these ideas or these beliefs that come into their mind, and they think that is the fact, but it's not. And this is really important. And when you're able to differentiate between those two things, that's going to help you manage your mind better. And why that's important is because when you manage your mind, you can really experience a tremendous amount of joy, regardless of what is going on around you. Okay? When you manage your mind, you can stop ruminating on the past. This is what our brain tends to do naturally. Or fearing the worst case scenario, something that would happen perhaps in the future. If you are somebody who battles imposter syndrome or feel guilty about not doing enough, or you're somebody who compares yourself to other people or think that you're inadequate, that can all stop, right? You don't have to continue to think in this way or feel all of these things that are negative anymore. That's huge. Okay, so now we know it's important. We know it can really be helpful, but the question is how. And what I would say is most people use these short-term strategies to manage their mind. They use distraction. They like to eat something. They go on Facebook. They watch Netflix. They're scrolling through their phone. We find all these ways to kind of avoid whatever is upsetting to us by means of distraction. And focusing on these short-term solutions really doesn't solve anything. Maybe in this moment, you don't have to feel all the negative emotions, but they don't go away, right? And not only that, these short-term solutions can actually create additional problems. So imagine if you're somebody who drinks a lot of alcohol so that you don't have to feel all of your feelings. Now you have gained weight, and maybe you don't sleep as well at night. And because you're not sleeping as well at night, you aren't recovering your energy, and so on and so forth. So all of these things are really, really important. Now, what that means is you can also become dependent on what we call dopamine hits from things like sugar, alcohol, nicotine, video games, social media, all of these things that we tend to gravitate to in the moment when we're feeling stressed. Okay. And as I said, the stress doesn't really go away. You become more anxious and start to feel negative because you don't have a good way to deal with it. All right. So what you really need is a reliable method to manage your thoughts. And the key to doing that is emotional intelligence. Now, the way that I like to break that down is there are, and I talk about this in my book, there's two main buckets under emotional intelligence. There's personal competency and there's social competency. We're not going to tackle social competency right now because we're just talking about managing your mind. So really, we're talking about your own self. And personal competency is then further broken down into these four little steps. So self-awareness. So being aware of your own thoughts. Like, what are the things that go through your mind when you're in a stressful situation? What do you tell yourself, right? Being aware of those thoughts is going to help you differentiate between, again, facts and fiction. And the other thing that's really important as well is to become aware of what emotions are, what their purpose is, not to try to avoid them, but to be able to feel them and understand the nature of them and how it's just part of your humanity, right? And then being able to master those emotions and ride the wave of them comes as a result of understanding how all of these building blocks come together, and as well as we'll talk about later, help you get to a place where you're optimally performing at your job. That is key. So just to kind of back up a bit, emotional intelligence, you've probably heard this term a lot. If you're not totally familiar with it, I would say a simple definition is it's just the ability to identify and manage your emotions. And because your emotions and your thoughts are very much linked, it's about being able to do so through, as we said, that self-awareness of what's going on in your mind. And what this does is it helps to prevent the accumulation of stress. And what we know is, as we said earlier, chronic stress is burnout. So being able to manage these emotions and the thoughts that contribute to them is essentially burnout prevention. And when you use emotional intelligence to manage your mind, you realize how much control you actually have over how you feel, right? I do this exercise with my clients where I actually have them reverse engineer how they want to feel and then come up with statements that help them do that, right? So it's very empowering and it allows you to be in alignment with your values. You have more control and you can become less reactive under stress. For those of you who find that you are overly reactive, you do and say things that maybe you regret afterwards, right? So this allows you to be more in control of yourself, make better decisions, and let go of that negativity more easily. So I want to share with you a story of somebody that I actually worked with. This is Amy, who's a nurse practitioner. And this is where she was before we started doing the work. She said, the life of a nurse practitioner and a business owner by day and mom by night took a heavy toll on me. I was running low on energy, sacrificing sleep and exercise to get work done, and feeling overwhelmed as my mind was filled with constant negative self-talk. I wonder how many of you can relate to where Amy was when I first met her, right? What she really wanted was to be able to focus on work while at work and on her family during the time that she was home. And she also wanted to get more sleep. So part of the issue with her was that she was feeling so anxious about not meeting every demand and every request of her patients at all times that she would get really, really nervous about what they're going to think and but feeling guilty that she's not doing enough. And so it was getting in the way of sleep. The more she had this anxiety, the less she was sleeping, the more exhausted she was. So you could say they're all tied together. Now, after working together for 5 weeks, she was no longer worried about setting those boundaries or disappointing her patients. So something really shifted in her mindset. As a consequence, her anxiety dropped by 60%, right? And because she was able to now sleep for an extra hour every night, her energy shot up as well as her satisfaction in her work. So everything is intertwined, right? You might not think that something that you're experiencing is really significant, but everything actually affects everything else. All right. So today, Amy is much more confident in her position. She gets her work done in less time. She's able to spend it with family members, especially her son. And if you remember what she was saying in the beginning, this is exactly where she wanted to be. So that was, the first thing I mentioned was after 5 weeks, but at the end of 90 days, which is what we're talking about today, as a result of working through the program with me, her thinking changed. And as she says, this sounds simple, but it revolutionized my life. And I can't emphasize that enough. A lot of this is going to sound really basic, but if it was that easy and that simple, you probably would have done it by now. I think there's something in coaching that allows you to really get results quickly. So this is exactly what she's talking about. She said, stop feeling anxious about not being readily available all the time. As a result, I started sleeping more each night. My energy dramatically increased. I feel more in control of my thoughts now. And most importantly, I'm able to focus on work during my work time and on my home life during home time. Okay, so just to emphasize, this is why it's important for us to get to that first step of managing our minds. So just for the sake of time, I'm going to just keep on moving ahead to step 2. And then if you have questions, please write them in the chat. We will get to them at the end of step 3. Okay. So step 2 now is You've managed your mind. Now it's about optimizing the way that you work. And this is about, again, focusing on 3 things: your mind, your time, and your efforts. Let me show you exactly what I mean by that. Okay. When you optimize the way that you work, you get your work done in less time, you exert less energy, you accomplish your goals a lot faster. Right? Then not only that, but your work starts to feel more pleasant, more meaningful, and get your nights and weekends back. And that's what we all ultimately want. So most people think that they aren't accomplishing their work in the time that they have because there's just too much on their plate. And certainly that can be true some of the time. But they think that the solution is then to work harder and longer. And the reality is that you can get more done in less time when you know exactly what to focus on. Okay. So a lot of times people are pouring more and more hours in. I actually worked with a veterinarian who was very burned out because she was coming into work extra early and leaving late to accomplish more. So again, like spending extra time getting the work done, and it just backfires. And here are some actual statistics based on research. So research shows that working more than 55 hours a week actually has a negative outcome. Not only does your productivity sharply fall after 50 hours a week, but compared to working 35 to 40 hours a week, you have a higher risk of stroke and a higher risk of dying from heart disease. So as nurses, I'm sure you can appreciate that. You know how terrible stress can be for your health. And in fact, we know that according to Forbes, working overtime, working more than 55 hours a week can really kill you ultimately. Okay, so we want to avoid that. So the question then is, how can you get your work done without killing yourself, right? So the 3 steps are, as I mentioned, to focus on your mind, your time, and your efforts. And I'll show you a case study of perfectionism. So this is the case of Sally. She's the one I was telling you about. She'd come to work early and she would leave late. And she said the problem was with her industry. What she really wanted to do is get her work done perfectly. And so what I did was I challenged her. I said, all right, you know what? I know that you think that you have to come early and stay late to get all of this stuff done, but how many shifts do you have between now and our next call? And she said 3. So I said, so I'm going to put together what I call a 3-shift challenge. And I'm going to challenge you for the next 3 shifts between now and our next call to leave on time. I want you to show up on time and I want you to leave on time. I don't want you to spend an extra minute at all. And let's kind of see how you do. This is an email she sent me. I hope you can see this, but she sent me this email basically in time for our next session. And she said, I just completed the 3-shift challenge and I managed to leave work on time 3 out of 3 days. Now, she had never been able to do this, but she was focused. All right. And here's what she says. I made sure to focus on which tasks needed to be completed and which tasks would be nice to complete, but could wait until the next shift, right? Towards the end of a shift, when I noticed myself thinking things like, I'll just have a quick look at the patient's results, but it was a task that wasn't really essential for that shift, she stopped herself and then she refocused on the day's essentials, right? So you notice how when she has that challenge, all of a sudden her mind is focused on time. It's like, okay, what time is it? How much do I have to get done? And now this task that's showing up in my purview, is this something I need to get done? Is this realistic in the time that I have? And as a consequence, she is more focused on the things that she has to do. She gets her work done on time. She leaves without spending additional time at work and gets her life back. All right. And she was very, very happy to have this experience. So this was totally like mind shattering. All right. Then we move on to step 3, which is really about changing your relationship with yourself so that you can recognize how extraordinary you already are. Now, I know this is going to really resonate for some of you because there are a lot of people who are in this field who are always giving to everybody else, but leaving themselves on the back burner. Okay, so most people think that they really have to prove their worth through productivity. And this creates a condition that really states you're only valuable when you've accomplished something. And that compulsion to prove yourself can really lead to exhaustion, which really gets in the way of productivity. So initially, like you're saying, I need to produce in order to be worthy, but now you're too exhausted to have that productivity. And now you feel even worse about yourself, right? And the truth of the matter is you don't have to do any of this because you're already worthy. So then what really gets in the way of feeling extraordinary is that lack of alignment between your inner and outer world. And I break this down into three things: your values, your beliefs, and your mindset. So how do you break out of this self-fulfilling prophecy? And the way to do that is through upgrading your identity. Okay. Once you do that, how your life will change amazingly is that you will have more sense of purpose. You'll feel good about yourself without having to do more. Wouldn't that be nice? And then you'll be able to finally relax and enjoy yourself. And so once you are aligned, the difference is so huge. So the old way, when you're kind of misaligned with your values, what happens is you get frustrated at work. You sabotage because you have all of these negative self-beliefs and fears and emotional triggers that come up. You have a fixed mindset and you're more likely to beat yourself up. But when you are aligned, if you do feel frustration about something that's happening at work, remember we talked earlier about resentment, then you can look at it as an unmet need and then find a way to meet it. You get out of your own way, you develop more of a growth mindset, and you start to have compassion for yourself, even when you fail or make mistakes. This is really, really important. This, again, is about the relationship with yourself and how do you treat yourself. So let's look at a case study of sabotage. So this is Jordan, somebody that I worked with. She was in sales and we had this conversation. She said to me, I'm working on the sale right now. If I close this sale, then I'll be happy. And I said, well, that's kind of interesting, right? When was the last sale that you closed? And she said, oh, that was 3 days ago. On Monday, I closed the sale. And I said, and how happy were you after you closed that sale? And she said, well, I was happy for about an hour. And after that, she started feeling anxious about the next sale. And so I said to her, you actually don't have to put your happiness on hold. You can be happy right now, regardless of whether you make this next sale or not, right? You're kind of confusing two different things. She was focusing on the money she would make as a result of the sale, when what she really wanted was to feel happy. Those two things are, sometimes mixed up in our brain. We make these conditions and these associations, but they're really unrelated. And so the number one skill to really feeling extraordinary is mindfulness, because mindfulness allows you to be present, be in the here and now, which allows you to be alert and engaged rather than have to ruminate over things that happened in the past or feel anxious about the future. It also helps you to discern what your stuck points are and gain control over your mind and body. And you can respond rather than react to those circumstances that we talked about earlier on. So again, this is how you design your life on purpose. You upgrade your identity by focusing in on things like your values, your beliefs, your mindset, and self-compassion. So here is somebody that I worked with. She was also a veterinarian. Her name was Corinne. And she tried to be indispensable at work. So no matter how much she did, she'd still be really, really hard on herself. And I don't know if you guys relate to this, but I have so many, particularly women in medicine, and when they share with me some of the self-talk that goes through their mind, it is really like jarring how much you guys give of yourselves to other people. You have such big hearts and you beat yourselves up like there's no tomorrow, right? Like, I mean, it really is astounding when you think about, you would never say these things to anybody else. And if anybody else said these things to you, like, you would not be friends with them, but you do this to yourselves a lot of the time. So I just want to highlight that because, this is very toxic, and I'm here to help you really change that relationship with yourself, which I think is really, really important. So again, the compulsion for Corinne to prove her worth was really exhausting, and it actually led her to feel very depressed. Mornings, she says, would feel like there's still some potential to accomplish things. She'd wake up kind of positive. It's like, okay, I'm going to conquer the day. By afternoon, She'd think that she hadn't done enough and she would feel disappointed in herself. And this was a pattern. This literally was like day in and day out, every single day would start and end in this way. Today, she is more emotionally stable, calm, peaceful, and energetic. And instead of looking for all the ways that she's inadequate, she looks for evidence that she is enough. Okay, this is really, really an important shift. And I think it's something that could benefit each and every one of you. So let's just review what we've talked about so far. We've talked about these 3 steps. The first one was to get in control of your mind. And the real key skill there to learn is emotional intelligence. Second step was how to optimize your work, which is really about time management and focusing. And step 3 is about changing your relationship with yourself. And the key skill there is mindfulness. So now you've got that step-by-step system to manage those challenging circumstances at work that help you get things done more quickly and feel amazing. And the best thing about this approach is that you're learning these life skills that help you stay calm and in control in any stressful situation, whether it's in your personal or your professional life. So let's just recap. We said the 3 steps to go from exhausted to extraordinary in 90 days is to get in control of your mind, to optimize your approach to work, and to change your relationship to yourself. Now, if you've made the choice to create more work-life balance and live an extraordinary life, but you're really struggling to create that blueprint that we talked about in the beginning, then what I want to do is I want to offer you a free 30-minute dial back your stress breakthrough session with me. And here's what's going to happen on the call. We're going to uncover the root cause of what's really burning you out. And you'll be surprised to know that burnout happens for very different reasons. So it's not like everybody burns out for the same reason. It's completely different for everyone else. So it's really important to understand exactly what is leading to your burnout, because then we can customize exactly what the next steps are going to be. So that's the first step, right? Then we want to identify what are the goals and the roadblocks to obtaining those goals for you, right? We want to get really clear on that. And that's where we develop that roadmap that's going to help you to focus on those most important steps to recover from burnout and to be really successful. So the link to get on a call with me is simply book a chat with Sharon.com. Okay. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about my program, which is actually entitled Exhausted to Extraordinary, I'm happy to share a little bit with that or about that with you, with your permission. Right. And this is also to really complete that step-by-step blueprint. You don't have to figure this all out on your own. I've already done it. I've worked with many of you, people are in the same profession as you, and allows you to really implement everything with guidance along the way. So this is the Exhausted to Extraordinary coaching program. It's a 90-day done with you that teaches you everything that I laid out today in the workshop, and I'll give you a quick synopsis of what's included. We've got, everything is broken down into modules. So we start out with, why are you exhausted in the first place, right? And what are the effects of chronic stress? You might be aware of many of them already, being that you're in the field, but we're also talking about 2 different approaches to transform out of this place of exhaustion. Then, as we mentioned today, emotional intelligence is a really important skill. It's the #1 skill to help you manage your mind and the negativity and the anxious thoughts. And so that's where we start. And from there, as you see, this follows the format that I laid out also in my book, where we talk about the 7 E's. So we go from emotional intelligence to empowerment. And by that, what I mean is, let me go back, is we're talking about eliminating those energy drains. So part of the reason you might be exhausted is because you're doing things that just drain your energy and you don't even realize that you have a choice about that. Or you maybe don't have enough boundaries where you need to have those boundaries. Or, maybe you need to refocus on things that you have more control over and let go of certain other things. Or maybe it's those negative mind habits that are completely draining you. So we're going to take a look more deeply into how to feel more empowered. Okay. And from that, we go into step 2, which is really about optimizing the way that you work. And one of the ways that we do that is through engagement in your work. We talk about how to get to optimal work engagement. We also talk about efficacy, which is about your confidence in your ability to do your job. So this is really helpful, especially if you are somebody who struggles with imposter syndrome and thinks that you need to prove something because you're worried about what people are going to think about you, right? This helps you maximize. And then we also want to talk about not just the mind, but the body. So this is where we look to boost energy. And you all know about self-care. You all know it's important, but you don't always engage in it. And so what I like to really focus in on first and foremost is those mindset obstacles that get in the way of self-care, how to remove those so that you can actually do the things that you know are good for you, right? And not sabotage. And then we also talk about effort, which is where you are working not as hard, right? We're looking for that balance between your effort and the rewards that you get from that effort. So this is very much related to motivation, but we're also talking about how to overcome things like perfectionism, procrastination. These are things that are energy drains that make us work too much or too little. And so we want to get to a place where it's more optimized. And this is where I want to leave you guys, right? So this is where we end the program. And this is, I call it enlightenment. But what I really mean by that is that we lighten the load through looking at those limiting beliefs and eliminating those and helping to retrain your brain to be calm and be more aligned with the values that you have for yourself. Okay. And then ultimately, change that relationship with yourself where you have more self-compassion, you're cultivating more gratitude, and you're separating that self-worth from your productivity. And the way that we implement all of this is through 3 steps. One is you have video modules. These are actually aligned with each of the ones that we just mentioned. So these are go at your own pace. I know you each have very different schedules, so you can watch these on your own time. Then we have these weekly coaching calls for the 12 weeks. So that's where you get all your questions answered. We go through how to take all the information that you learned in the videos and apply those to your specific situation to help you really bring it to the forefront, right? Like I just learned how to, separate my thoughts from my feelings or to reverse engineer my results. How can I apply it to this thing that's happening this week at work, right? Or I'm having a struggle with my husband, right? Or my wife or my partner. So we apply it to both work-related and personal-related issues because, as I said, these are life skills. And then in between those calls, you have unlimited email support. So if things come up, you're not left wondering. Okay, so as a result of being part of this program, if this is something that interests you, what my goal for you is to be able to turn that negativity around so that you can feel calm even in seemingly stressful or scary situations. You'll be able to bounce back more quickly from stress. So that's kind of the resiliency factor. We want to boost your energy. We want to recover it if you're feeling burned out, help you get your work done in less time and build up those healthy routines. So again, there's a lot built into this program. I've just created this little sheet to show you the value of each of these components, of the videos, the coaching calls, the bonus calls with me, the unlimited email support. We do also a burnout assessment before and after so that we can measure results over time so that you can see exactly what's contributed to your specific version of burnout and how you're doing by the end. That's some data that we have to work with. And there's additional things included like worksheets and templates and weekly challenges, bonus exercises, articles, videos, all that. So the value is $11,888, but clearly that's not the cost of the program for you guys. It's actually $6,000. And if you enroll within a week of this webinar, we actually dropped the cost by $1,000. So I want to give you guys an incentive if you're really serious about this and you're thinking about what next step to take. I want to help you get the results more quickly, and let's get started as soon as possible. Okay, so again, the link to sign up for a call to figure out if this is a good thing for you or not is book a chat with Sharon. All right. And what I'll also say is that, I have about 10 spots available. So if you're really curious about this, you really want to see if this is a good fit, then I encourage you to book that free call. It doesn't cost you anything. And people have gotten all kinds of amazing resources, not to mention some good insights as a result of getting on these calls. Okay. And at this point, what I'd love to do is bring it back to Steve and see if there are any questions from the participants.
Dr. Grossman, thank you. That was incredibly informative and helpful, and I think appropriate, for our audience that, as we mentioned at the beginning, is experiencing so much in the way of burnout and stress. And we see so many travel nurses that want to continue in the profession, but due to burnout, they're thinking of leaving it or have left it, and it's really a very difficult situation for them. We've got about 15 minutes left. We do have some questions and comments in the chat that I'll share in a second. What I would like to do, I have some questions that I have developed based on some of the things that we've observed, through our Gypsy Nurse Network discussion group on Facebook that I'm kind of summarizing here, but I want to pose to you. One of the questions or comments is, it seems like the issue of burnout, as it's articulated as burnout, it seems to be relatively recent, particularly in healthcare. It seems like, not long ago, 4, 5, 6 years ago, certainly pre-pandemic, we didn't hear an awful lot about burnout. We heard stress and so forth. We didn't necessarily hear about burnout. From your viewpoint, why are we hearing about that more now than what seems, at least certainly to me, more than ever before? Why is burnout becoming such a topic? Is it the pandemic? Is it some systemic issues with the healthcare system in general? What are your viewpoints on that?
So this might actually surprise you, but my point of view is that burnout was there all along, but we probably just didn't have the verbiage for it. And so we would call it things like exhausted, and we would call it things like stressed out. We didn't really have the vernacular. And all of a sudden, burnout shows up on the map, and people are like, oh, so if I'm really, really exhausted and I'm like just feeling all of this resentment, or I'm totally cynical, or my productivity's gone down because of all these like emotional exhaustion issues or mental exhaustion issues, then there's a word for that. That's called burnout. Yeah. So all of a sudden we're like, oh, okay. And where is this most prevalent? Well, one of the places it's most prevalent is in healthcare. So we start to see more people blogging about healthcare burnout and physician burnout and nurse burnout. And all of a sudden we're like, hey, that's me, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that it was always there. And actually the person who coined the term for burnout wrote about this decades ago, right? And actually he coined the term because he was burned out, and he wrote about all of these exact symptoms. So once we had a word for it, everybody was like, oh, well, that kind of describes my situation. And this is what I was saying earlier in the presentation happened with my clients, is as soon as I started to research it and I would listen for specific key words that they were talking about, I would say to them, it sounds like you're burned out. And then all of a sudden that light bulb moment happened for them. And they're like, oh, right. So sometimes we're very clear on it. And other times we need somebody to like feed us that word, because we're not putting two and two together. And that's actually really important. And if you're in the nursing profession, I think that you'll appreciate that, right? One of the reasons we diagnose these kinds of conditions is so that we can have the right treatment for it. If I tell you that I'm stressed, you're going to tell me, oh, why don't you just like take a day off or go to the spa?
Right.
But if I tell you that I'm burned out, it's a totally different treatment, because burnout is chronic stress, and there's a totally different thing that you need to do to get over something chronic than something acute.
What is the relationship, or is there a relationship between chronological age, the period of time that you spent in a particular role, and burnout? As we observe some of the discussions within our Facebook network group, we see nurses that are 27 years old, have been nursing for 2 or 3 years, and they're saying they're burned out. And there are others that have been in the business for 35 years, and they are very happy and, want to continue into their 60s. How do you uh, look at the, age and length of service factor, and how does that fit into burnout?
Yeah, I mean, I think intuitively that doesn't really make sense, right? You would think the longer you're in it, the more likely you are
Exactly.
going to be burned out. But what I've actually found is exactly what you're describing. And the reason for that is, well, there's probably like more than one reason, but like one reason is that when you've been doing it for a long time, you have to figure out your quote unquote blueprint, what works for you. And so people who have managed to stay in the profession, it's because they figured it out.
Yeah.
People who are new don't yet have the blueprint, they don't yet have the experience. They're like thrown into it and they're like, well, oh my God, like this is so stressful and how do I deal with this? And like they're just really new.
Yeah.
So they haven't gotten to that place where they figured all the different things that they need to do, like how to create work-life balance or how to deal with their patients or expectations or their need to please or setting boundaries. And they have a lot of guilt and, they're like driven by fear and guilt. And they're not necessarily doing enough in the form of self-care and recovery of their energy. The people who have been in it long enough have figured out how to set the boundaries and how to create more work-life balance and how to give but not overgive, right? So there's so much that we have to figure out in order to create a sustainable way of staying in our job and in the industry that sometimes it takes years and years and years before we get there. And that's where really coaching can come in to shorten that window.
One of the things that we have seen, particularly over the past few years, has been this aspect of compassion fatigue, where nurses and other frontline healthcare workers, particularly due to the pandemic, and especially at the beginning, where there was so much death and so many serious illnesses, people. Some of the, in particular, travel nurses were discussing just how they didn't feel like they could give anymore, and they felt guilty that somebody would pass, and that might be the third person that had passed in the past 3 days, and they felt like that they were no longer able to offer the compassion that they felt that they should, and it was very depressing and stressful for them to do that. How does that factor into burnout? Would compassion fatigue be a symptom of burnout?
So I would say this, everything that you're describing is, number one, we know is very, very common, especially in healthcare. And I think it aligns with being that pleaser. And I call that, I don't know if people are aware, but I actually have a podcast called Decode Your Burnout. And what we talk about there is how to look at these three personality types, which I call like your burnout personality. Are you a thinker, a feeler, or a doer? And what you're describing is somebody who's a feeler. And people who are feelers tend to be more of your pleasers, right? The people who are trying to take care of everybody else. And they have a lot of guilt when they're not successful because there's always that feeling of I'm not doing enough. There's more people out there that need my help. And, feeling like they've never arrived, right? And it doesn't matter how much you do. If you've helped 1,000 people and one person dies, then you shouldn't even, you have no right to be at the table, right? This is like a lot of the negative self-talk that I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Like they beat themselves up because it's that desire so strongly to help and to save and to heal. But we're not taking care of ourselves in the process, right? We're out of alignment with like the two things that need to happen, the outer and the inner world. So the only way that we can continue to show up and take care of all the people out there is by taking care of ourselves. And I have to tell you that I'm not a nurse, but as you know, I've been a psychologist for 20 plus years and I've never burned out. And people who are in my field now who are burnout coaches, I think I'm probably the only burnout coach out there that I know of that hasn't experienced burnout. Like everybody else who is a burnout coach has gotten to this place as a result of burnout and then recovery. And then like now I want to teach about like what I learned along the way. And for me, it was a very different kind of a journey. It was more about like being really intentional about being able to provide service to my clients without burning out, and setting it up from the beginning to be able to do this more sustainably. So I think that there are things that we can do, even if you are a people pleaser, even if you are racked with guilt, even if you want to have a large impact, but it's taking a toll on your personal and health, that you can still show up even more powerfully than you are right now by having more of that balance.
Well, it's interesting because you talk about this aspect of self-care, if you will, and there's probably no profession that needs it more than people in the medical community, and certainly travel nurses. But I think, at least from my observation, a lot of travel nurses feel guilty about self-care.
Yes.
That it is, well, I don't have time for that, or I have to get to my next assignment, or that's selfish. I need to take care of
Exactly.
others. Why I can't focus on myself. I need to take care of others. But it seems to me, you talked about self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes.
That's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you're not taking care of yourself, it's very difficult for you to do well in your job and care for others, and you eventually get burned out, correct?
Absolutely. And if you recall, when I talked about the energy module in my course, I
Right.
don't talk to you about what to do. I talk to you about how to eliminate the obstacles to self care, because that's exactly everything you just mentioned.
Yeah.
The reason we're not doing these things is because we believe that we don't deserve it, that we haven't done enough, that it's selfish. Like, we have all these ideas that get in the way of us taking care of ourselves. And we're basically sabotaging our goal of having maximal impact. We cannot have maximal impact without being part of the equation, right? So I help people actually eliminate all of these obstacles so that they can show up for themselves and be in a more sustainable practice and then have that maximal impact. You cannot do it one-sided.
Well, and one of the things that we've observed as well is the fact that many nurses. I mean, obviously, just nursing as a profession, regardless of travel nursing, just nursing as a profession, uh, certainly, particularly due to the past couple of years, a lot of nurses are leaving the profession. They're citing burnout as an example. But I recall when you and I met back a few weeks ago, we talked about this aspect of many nurses that are leaving the profession. It's heartbreaking to them. They don't want to leave.
Yeah.
They do have a passion for it. They're trying to rekindle that passion, but they just feel like, I have no alternative. I'm so burnt out.
Yeah.
I'm so done, as they say. I
Yeah.
want to move on. But then there's that guilt after they've moved on, that, like, did I do the right thing? So it's really heartbreaking in that regard. What what percent, if people do the right things in terms of self-care and following along some of the guidelines you mentioned, what percentage of nurses would be salvageable from the perspective of returning to nursing, recovering from burnout? What percentage?
So I actually don't have data on that, but
Yeah.
what I can share is that from my personal experience of working with my clients is um, they've all been burned out for different reasons, and they all were in a way better place by the end of 90 days, which is a very short amount of time in the large scheme of things, to be able to get back to yourself. And sometimes it's not even getting back to yourself, but it's actually reinventing yourself, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like I was talking about. It's about changing your identity. And maybe if you're that people pleaser, maybe it's about, as you saw in the case of Amy, that nurse practitioner, that all of a sudden she didn't feel guilty when she couldn't get to her clients every demand, every text or message that was sent. That she would have these 40-minute commutes from work to home, and during that time while she's driving, all of these pings would come in.
Yeah.
And she'd be like, oh my God, like they're all gonna be like wondering why I'm not answering them immediately. She's like, but I can't answer them because I'm driving. So she'd have so much anxiety and guilt. And this would just kind of perpetuate to the point where she couldn't fall asleep at night. And, as I mentioned, the less sleep she got, the more exhausted she was, the more resentful she got. Like, she was really stuck.
Sure.
And she got to a place within 5 weeks where she just completely shifted the way that she saw her role. And she realized that, you know what, in order for me to be the best version of myself so that I can be there for them in that version, I have to change something. Like, this doesn't work, right? I have to change how I think about this, how I think about my role, and how quickly I get back to people. So this is about setting expectations and believing that it's okay to do so. And so there's a lot of mindset work that has to happen here, right? And I think that once you do that, and it doesn't take very long, right? It's just a matter of weeks, that it has a huge ripple effect, because as we saw with her, like her anxiety not only went way down, but she started getting more sleep. She had more energy. She had more confidence. She enjoyed her work more. Like everything gets affected by making little tweaks. And that's really the beauty of the work that I do, is that, you know, people think like, you know, if it's taken me, you know, years and years to get to this point of burnout, is it going to take me years and years to get to the other side? And the answer is no. As long as you know exactly what to do and you're implementing it, then you can have very quick results. And that's what gives me a lot of hope, because as you mentioned, the people that I love to work with most are the people who actually want to stay in healthcare, and they just don't know how, right? And I will say this, like, there is a time and place for people to make career changes. And I've spoken to plenty of people who have done that, who have turned from being a nurse or a physician to being a coach or being a yoga instructor, or, you know, doing investment, real estate and things like that. And they're totally happy, and that's cool. But I'm talking to the select few who want to stay in it because they love it, because it's their life purpose, and they just want to figure out the how.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to make a tremendous difference in the quality of your life and the longevity of your career.
Yeah, no, I think that the vast majority of nurses that we have seen through the years, through our social platform, they love what they do. They want to stay. They want to figure out ways to, you know, to stay in it under extraordinary circumstances at times, but they want to find out ways to stay in it and, you know, kind of recover that that passion that they had for it when they originally went into nursing. So, Dr. Grossman, we're just about out of time. I do have a couple of comments and questions here, and then, you know, we can wrap it up. But, you know, number one, obviously on the crawl there, if anybody would like to speak to Dr. Grossman directly and book a chat, they can do book a chat with Sharon.com. Go there. It's also in our chat as well. And can you please give the name of your book again, in case anybody, I know it's available on Amazon, I believe, right?
It is.
Okay,
This is it.
you're gonna have a
The
copy
7
right there.
Invitations to Burnout.
Awesome.
Right? So, yeah, if you look for 7E, there's not a lot of books with that title. Or you can just pop my name into Amazon and you'll find it.
All right. Couple of comments here. Certainly, we've got a number of comments mentioning how people were in need of this information. They're appreciative of it. Excited to start to look at things in a different way. We do have Gina Rose that said, I was in a workshop to teach anti-anxiety techniques, and for some reason it triggered more anxiety. Is this possible? I assume yes, it is.
That's really interesting. Gina, I would love to talk to you and find out more.
Maybe she was in the wrong seminar or something. I don't know, but I would imagine that when you start to examine burnout and you start to examine some of these triggers, if you will, there is a bit of anxiety. You know, it's kind of like you're taking time to focus on yourself, and you say, boy, it's uncomfortable. I don't like looking at this, but you have sometimes, I guess, you have to go through the pain to get to the healing, right?
Well, there's that, and there's also the idea that a lot of people have that if they go down that rabbit hole and they look at their anxiety, or they look at their triggers or their trauma, whatever it is, that they'll get stuck there. So then they have anxiety about the anxiety, right?
Yeah.
This whole meta process. Right. And this is where the emotional intelligence training can be really, really helpful. And I can share that some of my clients, what they've said as a result of learning this is that, especially people who were just anxious their entire lives, right? This isn't like a new thing. It's not just a work-related burnout thing, but just like are on the anxious side of things, that they realized that sometimes things go wrong, but that they can manage, and that it's not the end of the world, and that there's kind of this ebb and flow that happens between the good things in life and the bad things in life. And they don't have to make meaning out of it and like try to blame themselves or make up some story about it. It's like, it just is, right? And I'll recover. And the other thing too is, and I like to maybe end on this, is that sometimes things happen and we don't really understand what that means in the grand scheme of things for us, right? So let's say you, I'll just like make something up. Let's say you get, you're married, and you know your spouse says they want to get a divorce, or you get laid off from your job, right? Something happens and you're like, oh my God, this is terrible, right? But think about how many things like that have happened in your life where at that time you thought it was going to be like this horrendous thing. You got all anxious about it. You got maybe even depressed and stressed out. And then you kind of fast forward and something really great came out of that. Like you met somebody who was even more of a life partner than your first partner, right? Like it was a much better fit for you. Or you found an even better job, or you maybe even switched careers and now you're like so much more in tune with who you are and how you show up, and like you feel so much more fulfilled. Like this stuff, this sort of thing happens all the time. The thing is, in this moment, as the bad thing is happening, we don't have access to the future. We don't know where it's going to lead us. So what I want to leave you with is the idea of hope, that even when bad things happen, it doesn't mean that you get stuck there. It means that there's something else coming. And maybe this is making some space for that, right? And so just to be open, and this is where the mindfulness really comes in, right? Where you're like, I'm just in the here and now. I don't have to get really attached to the past, and I don't have to be really anxious about the uncertainty of the future. I can just be in this moment and experience joy if that's what I want, or experience a sense of peace, right? And that's, again, sounds really, really simple, perhaps even oversimplified, but it is a skill that when you learn how to do this, it just transforms your life.
Well, it's a great way to end our session, and thank you so much, Dr. Sharon Grossman, for the session today, and certainly on behalf of the Gypsy Nurse, that's really what we want for our travel nursing friends and our community out there as we try to support them as peace. We would like them to, have a fulfilling and satisfying career, and hopefully stay with it if they have the passion for it and want to continue stay with it. But information like this is certainly helpful. So again, Dr. Sharon Grossman, thank you so much for joining us today. Would definitely encourage people, if they're interested, to reach out to you directly. We have your information in the chat here, and if you're joining us late, we will be making this session available on demand on thegypsynurse.com. So if you joined us late, lots of great information here. So don't worry, you won't miss out. We will be, making this available for everybody. So Dr. Grossman, thank you so much for joining us today. Rachel, I don't know if you have any wrap up words for us. We ran a little bit long, but well worth it. It's not often we get this sort of great expert information on a very, very important topic.
Definitely. No, yeah, everything well said. It's great. I see all the time in our network group people wanting to switch professions. And so I wonder if, them figuring out like, oh, I'm probably just burnt out, that might benefit them rather than just completely ditching healthcare completely and finding a whole new career to start from the bottom. So hopefully some of that will resonate with them and they'll want to stick with their career instead of ditching it. But thank you so much. And like Steve said, this will be on demand. So share it with your friends, and we will see you guys next time.